Let me ask you something direct, and I want you to actually sit with it before you answer. How much of your mental space right now is taken up by them? How much of what you do, the posts you put up, the messages you craft, the stories you choose to share, the version of yourself you present to the world, how much of it is on some level aimed at them? At making sure they know you're doing okay, at making sure they see what they're missing, at staying visible enough that they don't forget you exist, or interesting enough that they start to wonder what you're thinking, or put together enough that they feel the loss of not having you. Be honest with yourself, because this is the kind of question that requires honesty. If the answer is more than 0, if any meaningful portion of your behavior right now is organized around managing their perception of you, then what I'm about to say matters more than you might expect. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to change the way you think about this entire situation. Not in the direction of strategy, not in the direction of gameplay, in the direction of getting yourself back. You need to move in silence. Right now. Not as a tactic, not as a technique, not as a carefully calculated move designed to trigger their anxiety and make them come running, but as an act of genuine self-recovery. Because at some point in this dynamic, you lost something important, and it's time to start recovering it. First, what moving in silence is not. Because there's a version of this idea that circulates in every comment section and every advice thread, and I want to be clear about the difference. Because the wrong version of this will not help you. The wrong version keeps you stuck in the exact dynamic you're trying to get out of, just wearing a different costume. Moving in silence is not playing hard to get. It's not performing unavailability. It's not strategically withholding yourself so they think you're busier and more desirable than you are. It's not the slow fade designed to make them anxious. It's not posting a photo of yourself looking amazing and then not responding to their comment so they feel the rejection they've been causing you. If that's the version you're considering, be honest with yourself. It won't work. Not in any way that lasts. Because underneath all of that, you're still organized around them, still making your choices based on what they'll see and how they'll react, still performing your life for an audience of one. And that performance keeps you exactly as entangled as you were before, just from a different angle. Real silence is fundamentally different. Real silence is when you genuinely, without performance, stop making decisions based on what signal they'll send to a specific person. When you stop checking to see if they noticed, when you stop timing things, curating things, spacing things out for effect, when you actually, not strategically, but actually redirect your attention somewhere else. That kind of silence has nothing to do with them. It's entirely about you. And for most people in dynamics with avoidance, it's the first genuinely self-directed thing they've done in a long time. What this dynamic actually does to a person, before we talk about what to do, let's talk honestly about what's already happened. Because most people who've been in an avoidant dynamic for a while are too close to it to see the effect clearly. When someone's availability is inconsistent, when you're never quite sure where you stand, when the warmth comes and goes without explanation, when you've spent weeks or months trying to read signals and interpret behavior and figure out what you did or didn't do to cause the temperature to drop, your focus shifts. Gradually, almost without you noticing. But it shifts. It shifts from your own life to theirs, from your own needs to their comfort level, from what you actually want from a relationship to what's acceptable to want given their limitations. From building your own life to monitoring theirs for signs of what's coming next. You stop thinking about your own goals as much. You stop investing in your friendships with the same energy. You stop being as present in your own life because some significant portion of your attention is always partially aimed at someone who isn't giving you the same back. And over time, quietly, without any single dramatic moment, you get smaller. Not because they deliberately diminished you, because the act of organizing your inner life around someone else's emotional availability is by nature diminishing. It shrinks the space you take up in your own story. You become a supporting character in the story of whether or not they're going to show up. Moving in silence is the beginning of taking the lead role back. And I want to be clear about what that costs. Up front, it costs you the sense of control you've been getting from managing their perception of you, the illusion of influence, the feeling that if you just say or do or post the right thing, you can tilt this in your favor. Giving that up feels like losing something. But what you're actually losing is the anxiety of always performing. And what you gain is your actual life back. Why silence disrupts the avoidant dynamic. Specifically, now. Let's talk about why this particular approach works differently with avoidance than it might with other attachment styles. Because there's a psychology here that matters. Avoidants are wired around one central operating principle: maintain enough distance to feel safe. They regulate closeness and space based on how threatened their nervous system feels. And for most of their relationships, especially with anxious or insecure attachment styles, they've settled into a pattern that runs on autopilot. That pattern looks like this. The other person pursues, they regulate the distance. The other person reaches, they step back. The other person makes themselves consistently available, they take that availability for granted. The other person expresses need, they feel smothered and withdraw further. None of this is conscious. It's not deliberate cruelty. It's just the shape their attachment system defaults to when the input it receives is consistent emotional pursuit. The pursuit triggers their deactivating strategies, and the distance this creates triggers more pursuit from the person on the other side. And so the cycle runs and runs and runs. Here's what feeds it: your predictability, your consistent presence in their periphery. The fact that on some level they always know you're still there, still paying attention, still oriented toward them even when they're not particularly oriented toward you. That security, that baseline knowledge that you're still available, is what allows them to keep regulating from a comfortable distance. When you go quiet, genuinely not performatively quiet, something changes in that calculus. The thing they were passively taking for granted is no longer guaranteed. The person who was always trackable becomes harder to read. The warmth they relied on in the background becomes less consistent, less predictable. And avoidants, who manage their anxiety through control and predictability, through knowing where things stand so they can calibrate their distance, do not like variables. They especially don't like variables that they didn't create. Because when they're the one who created the distance, they're in control of it. When you create it, when your energy genuinely moves elsewhere, they're not. That shift in the dynamic is not a trick, it's just what happens when you stop making yourself predictable. When you stop handing them the comfort of knowing you're still there, and still watching, and still waiting. What they do with that shift tells you something true about where things actually stand. What you stop doing when you move in silence. Let's get concrete, because silence is a set of behaviors, not just a feeling. And some of these behaviors you might not have recognized as performing. You stop posting for an audience of one, you stop putting up the carefully timed update or the subtly worded caption that you're hoping will land in their awareness in a particular way. Not because social media is bad, but because you're going to notice, if you pay attention, the specific things you post or don't post based on the one person you're hoping will see it. You stop over-explaining yourself to them and to mutual people who might report back. You stop feeling the pull to account for your choices, your mood, your decisions. You stop managing their perception of you by controlling the information that reaches them. You stop reaching out just to maintain presence. The text that isn't really about checking in but is about managing your own anxiety. The casual message designed to remind them you still exist. The reaching that's not about actual connection, but about making sure the door stays open, the flame stays visible, the possibility doesn't expire. You stop tracking them, the social media checks, the looking at their stories to see if they've been active, the piecing together of what they're doing and who they've been with from fragments of information you're not supposed to be reading. All of that. Stop. And you stop. This is the one that most people underestimate. You stop having the conversations in your head, the imaginary arguments, the explanations you've been preparing, the things you'd say if they reached out. The things you said wrong that you keep replaying. The script for the moment you'll finally get clarity. All of that processing is taking enormous energy. It is keeping you in a relationship in your head that doesn't exist on their end. Silence is not just about what you don't say to them, it's about what you stop saying to yourself about them. The specific way you've been handing them control. I need to get specific here because there's a pattern in avoidant dynamics that most people don't recognize until someone names it directly. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You have been doing something that feels like love, and on some level it is love, but it has been functioning as a control mechanism, not your control, theirs. Here's what I mean. Every time you've made yourself visible to them, every text, every story post, every message that said thinking of you or saw this and thought of you, you've handed them information about where you are emotionally. You've told them the door is still open. You've communicated without saying it. I'm still here. I'm still waiting. I still want this. And that information, that constant low-level signal that you're still present, still interested, still available, is what gives them the freedom to regulate the distance. because they know the distance isn't going to cost them anything. They know that however far they retreat, you'll be there when they come back. They don't have to earn your presence, because your presence has been freely given regardless of what they offered in return. This is not a criticism of you, it's a description of how the dynamic works. And the reason it works this way is that what you were offering felt like love, because it was love. It was genuine. But it was also, functionally, handing them the keys to the pace and terms of this connection. Moving in silence means taking those keys back, not out of punishment, not out of strategy. Because your presence is not something someone should be able to take for granted without earning it, because the door being open has a cost. Your time, your energy, your emotional availability, and that cost should be met with something real. When you go quiet, when you genuinely withdraw the constant signal that you're still there and still waiting, you stop handing them the control. And that changes everything about the dynamic. Not because you've made a clever move, but because you've stopped making a move that wasn't working. The connection between silence and attachment patterns, here's something that most videos about moving in silence leave out entirely. And it's actually the most important piece. The reason you've been doing the things I described, the over-explaining, the presence maintenance, the performing, the tracking, is not weakness. It's not desperation. It's your attachment system doing exactly what it was designed to do. If you have anxious attachment tendencies, and many people who find themselves in avoidant dynamics do, then proximity seeking when you feel disconnected is not a choice. It's an automatic response. When you feel the bond threatened, when you feel the distance growing, your nervous system starts sending the signal, do something, reach out, restore the connection, fix this. And so you do. You reach, you text, you post, you perform, you try to close the distance. And temporarily, sometimes it works. They respond, they soften, they give you just enough to ease the alarm. And then the cycle starts again. The reason silence is hard, genuinely hard, not strategically hard, is because it requires you to override that alarm, to feel the disconnection, feel the anxiety, feel the urge to reach, and choose not to act on it. That is not a small thing. For a nervous system wired to manage threat through connection seeking, staying quiet and pulling inward is the behavioral equivalent of swimming against the current. Which is why I'm not asking you to just be less available. I'm asking you to do something that requires actual internal work. To recognize the alarm when it goes off. To sit with it rather than soothe it with a message. To tolerate the discomfort of not knowing instead of chasing, the temporary relief of sending something that gives you a few minutes of certainty followed by hours of wondering what their response means. That work, that sitting with the discomfort instead of acting on it, is not just about this relationship. It is the beginning of a different relationship with your own nervous system. One where you are the one in charge of what you do, not the anxiety. That's what silence actually builds, when you do it for real. What moving in silence actually looks like day to day. So what do you do instead? Because this doesn't mean sitting at home staring at the wall. This doesn't mean performing thriving while secretly monitoring their every move. This means genuinely actually putting your life in the center of your own story. You make plans that have nothing to do with them. Not to look busy, not to create an impression, because your life is happening right now in real time, and you've been paying attention to the wrong thing. You invest in the relationships that are actually working, the friends who show up consistently, the family members you've been slightly neglecting because your bandwidth has been elsewhere, the people who don't require you to decode anything, the people whose love for you is not a mystery. You do the thing you've been putting off, the project, the application, the creative work you stopped making time for, the version of your life you've been waiting to start until this situation gets resolved. Start it now. Not because it makes you look better, because it belongs to you and you've been leaving it on the shelf. You stop consuming content that's entirely about understanding them and start consuming content about understanding yourself, your own patterns, your attachment style, your history with intimacy, your relationship with your own needs. Because some of what you're experiencing in this dynamic isn't only about them. Some of it is about what you've been willing to accept and why, and what that says about where you're at with your own healing. You sit with what surfaces when you stop filling every quiet moment with thinking about this situation. Because there is likely something there, some feeling, some fear, some unresolved thing that the focus on the avoidant dynamic has been allowing you to orbit around without looking directly at it. Silence creates space. Space, if you're willing to stay in it, will show you things. What silence does to their system. I said this was not about them, and primarily it isn't, but I'm also not going to pretend that silence has no effect on an avoidant, because it does. And understanding that effect is useful, not so you can weaponize it, but so you have realistic expectations for what might happen. When you go genuinely quiet, when your energy actually withdraws, when you become less consistently present and less readable in their periphery, avoidants tend to feel one of two things, often both, in sequence. The first is relief. Avoidants often experience consistent emotional pursuit as pressure, even when they care about the person doing the pursuing. Some space can genuinely feel better to their nervous system. So don't be surprised if the first response to your silence is nothing, or peace, or them seeming to be completely fine. Be prepared for that. Don't let it be the thing that pulls you back in. The second thing, which usually comes later, and not always, but often, is a kind of restlessness, a noticing. The person who was always there is less present. The warmth they've been passively relying on is less consistent. The certainty that they could reach back at any time and you'd be there starts to feel less certain. For an avoidant who has not made a real decision about you, this might produce little more than mild curiosity. They might glance at your profile, they might think about you briefly, but it doesn't compel them toward you because the decision to move toward you was never really made. But for an avoidant who has, underneath all the protection and the distance, genuinely chosen you, for someone who, at their interior level, has made a quiet decision that you matter, that restlessness becomes something else. It becomes the thing that moves them. That prompts them to reach out in some small, low-risk way that says, I noticed. I don't like this. You're still on my mind. That's not guaranteed. Silence is not a magic spell. Some avoidants will feel relief and stay in it. Some will not miss your presence in the way you're hoping. And that outcome, as painful as it is also important information. It tells you something true about where you stand, about whether you are being held or just tolerated. The truth is better than the confusion, even when it hurts more in the moment. Why this is hard, and what that hardness means. Let me say something about the difficulty of this, because a lot of people here move in silence and think, okay, I'll try that. And then they last about 3 days before they check their phone, or send a message, or post something they immediately regret. And then they feel like they failed, like they don't have the willpower, like they're too far gone in this dynamic to pull out of it. That's not what's happening. What's happening is that you're trying to rewire a pattern using willpower alone, without addressing the underlying reason the pattern exists. And willpower, as it turns out, is not the solution to anxious attachment. The solution is understanding. And the understanding I want you to have is this. When the urge to reach out arrives, when the anxiety spikes and your whole body is saying send the message, what you're experiencing is not a reflection of how much you love them. It's a reflection of how activated your nervous system is. It's your attachment system doing its job, detecting a threat to the bond and mobilizing you to fix it. That feeling is not about them specifically. It is a pattern, one that probably predates them, one that has probably shown up in other relationships, one that is yours to understand and work with regardless of how this particular situation resolves. So, when the urge to break the silence comes, and it will come, the work is not to white-knuckle your way through it. The work is to notice what the urge feels like in your body, to name it, to understand where it's coming from. To sit with it for 20 minutes, not because the urge will disappear, but because you're practicing the choice to respond to it differently than you have been. And if you break the silence, if you send the message or check the profile or fall back into the pattern, that is not failure. That is information about how activated your system is, about how much work this requires, about what kind of support might actually help you do this. One step back does not erase the work. You reset and you try again, with more understanding this time, with more compassion for yourself. This is not a performance. It's a practice. The real reason you need this. Here's the bottom line. Here's what all of this is actually about. You need to move in silence because you have been giving your most valuable resource, your sustained attention and energy, to someone who has not been consistently giving theirs back. And that is not sustainable. It is not equitable, and it is not who you are at your best. You are not someone who exists to wait. You are not someone whose worth is determined by whether this particular person chooses to show up for you. You have a life that belongs to you, that is happening right now, regardless of how this situation resolves. And that life deserves your full presence in it. Moving in silence is the act of giving your life that presence, of choosing to actually be here in your own experience instead of spending that experience in the waiting room of someone else's emotional process. It is fundamentally an act of self-respect, and you have earned the right to it. The version of you that genuinely, not as a performance, not as a strategy, but genuinely redirects inward, tends to your own life, starts investing in your own becoming. That version of you is not performing anything. They're just living. And there is nothing more grounded, more whole, or more worth returning to than a person who has stopped waiting and started going. The version of you that exists on the other side of this, here's something I want you to picture, not as a motivation technique. As an honest description of what tends to happen when someone does this work for real, the version of you that genuinely moved in silence, not as a tactic, but as a way of living, is different from the version of you that's been organized around this dynamic. Not dramatically different, not unrecognizably different, but different in a way you'll notice from the inside, and different in a way other people will notice from the outside. You're less reactive. Things that used to send you into an anxious spiral, a delayed response, a shift in tone, a period of distance, have less power over you. Not because you stopped caring, but because you've been building something inside yourself that doesn't collapse every time the external situation wobbles. You're clearer about what you want, about what you'll accept, about the difference between something that's genuinely working and something that requires you to constantly minimize your own needs to keep it afloat. The clarity doesn't feel like coldness, it feels like coming back to yourself. You're more present in your actual life, in your actual conversations, in your actual body. The low-grade anxiety that's been running in the background, the constant monitoring, the second-guessing, the ongoing analysis starts to quiet. Not all at once, but noticeably. And here's the thing about that version of you. They're more capable of a real relationship than the version that's been caught in this dynamic. Because a real relationship requires two grounded, self-possessed people choosing each other from a place of genuine stability, not from anxiety, not from the need to prove something, not from the fear of being abandoned. The work you do in the silence doesn't just improve this situation, it prepares you for every relationship after it that is worth more than any single outcome with any single person. What comes back, and what to do with it. Let me close with this, because some of you are going to do this work, genuinely do it, and something is going to happen. Either they come back in some form, or they don't. And both of those outcomes give you something. If they reach out, if the space you created prompts them to make contact, to say something real, to show up in a way they haven't been showing up, pay attention to what they actually do, not just to the fact that they did something. Because reaching back across the gap is a beginning, not an answer. Watch whether the pattern changes or whether this is just the pressure valve, them returning to reset the dynamic so you become available again, only to pull back again once they feel secure. Real change looks different from relief seeking. Real change sustains itself. Real change involves them saying something about what happened, taking some responsibility for the pattern, and behaving differently going forward. Not just for a week, but over time. Watch for that. And if it's not there, if the reaching out is just reaching out, just maintaining connection, without any real shift, that is information, important information about what they're capable of right now. And if they don't come back, if the space you create stays space, that is also information. It tells you something about what your presence in their life was doing and what your absence reveals. It tells you whether this was a real connection built on genuine mutual choosing or whether it was a dynamic built on your availability. Either way, the silence gave you the truth. And truth, even the painful kind, is always more useful than comfortable confusion. Keep moving. Keep building, keep going inward. And if you're doing this genuinely, if you're actually redirecting your energy, actually building something, actually starting to feel the difference between living your life and performing it, you will notice something shift. Not in them necessarily, in you. A certain groundedness, a certain clarity, a certain reduction in the background noise. That shift is you coming back to yourself, and the version of you that's fully here, fully present, fully invested in their own becoming. That person doesn't need to perform anything. They're already the answer. The healing room is right here.